So that's the story of Enoch Godongwana for the 2023 fiscal year of the South African government. I'm looking at an incredible picture here. It's a picture of the South African rand. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to find the range that we've traded here today so you can see the scale of advance that we are looking at the moment. So the range is from 1816 to 1839 to the dollar. And inside that range, at the moment, we are sitting at 1827, suggesting that South African markets are welcoming the budget that's been presented by the finance minister today. So let us get into the meat of it and dig into what the minister proposed and what it means for the South African economy going forward. Join me in the studio. I have got Alex. He's a director at Deloitte, who will come and talking about that no tax increase. Is that what you said, right?
That's correct.
Good. Celebration. Also joining me in studio is Johann Gondo. He is a senior research analyst at Nedbank CIB. I see you're also smiling, sir.
No, today I'm smiling.
Today you're smiling. I can't remember the last time that I had panelists that were all happy almost all around. But we're still to go. We're also going to be joined by Professor Patrick Bond, who is Professor of Sociology at the University of Johannesburg. Prof, is that a smile that I see as well?
No, I'm very worried. In fact, I think there's some really potential problems coming out of this budget.
Okay. And also joining us for this conversation is Johann Els, Chief Economist at Old Mutual Investment Group. Johann, can I start with you and ask if you are smiling? And if you are, and if you are not, you'll need to tell me why, both ways. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Yes, I am smiling because I think relative to recent expectations in the markets, the budget was good. It firstly continued with the fiscal consolidation plan, cutting the deficit, stabilizing the debt profile, with fairly decent, fairly credible assumptions. We can still talk about the assumptions around the wage bill and COVID grant. There's some risk there. But it's a good budget. And then they did come with Eskom debt relief. And while that lifts the debt profile of government a little bit, it does reduce significantly Eskom risk, where government will have to stand up for if Eskom should fail as a company. So I think overall, a pretty good budget and no tax increases for individuals. In fact, tax relief for individuals.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think it's a pretty good budget under the circumstances, especially.
Yeah. Johann, so I have got Johann Gondo here, and he is from Nedbank CIB. He looks at the fixed income market, and I'll tell you why I'm bringing him into the conversation, even though I'm still talking to you. So last year, he was supposed to go on holiday. He didn't go on holiday because he was waiting for Eskom results. That's how worried he was. Today, he is smiling. How credible are those Eskom numbers in your view that the minister has presented? I'm going to come to him, but I wanted to start with you first.
I think it's good in the sense that it's going to be implemented over a period of time. It's not all immediately. And there's some conditions that Eskom has to comply with. So, as I said, it reduces significantly Eskom's risk that could potentially come home to roost on Treasury, on government. So the numbers that they going to transfer, I think that's a fairly big chunk. It's more than half of Eskom's debt. So I think it makes sense in my mind. So overall, if I'm not in the bond market, but from an economist's perspective, I think there should be good news budget for the bond market as well, given that fiscal consolidation as a policy continues, deficit continues to come off, that we're now running primary surpluses. We're no longer borrowing to pay interest on our debt. And that's a big one. So all of this should be good news for the bond market as well.
Yeah, so let's delve into the bond market, Johns. You, when you came in, of course, the first question I asked you was Eskom, and I asked for your reaction, and what I saw was a smile. Explain to me what the minister has proposed here, given the huge worries that the market had before the minister pronounced on his actions today.
Okay, so basically Eskom had some very big debt maturities coming over the next 5 years, averaging about 70 billion. And the reality, a year, and the reality is they just did not have the cash flow wherewithal to do it, and so they were cutting things like maintenance. And so what this is doing is first giving the market certainty that those debt obligations will be met.
Okay.
And the second certainty that's coming through is that the method of providing the debt service doesn't compromise or prejudice any existing lenders
Right.
for the next 3 years at least.
There is no haircut here. There's no willful suggestion of any kind of haircut, nor South Africa trying to wiggle out of its obligations.
100%. So that, I think, has been the first bit of uncertainty clear.
Yeah.
And we came out of the MTBPS last year uncertain about what a debt swap or debt transfer meant.
Yeah.
In this case, they're just giving a subordinated loan.
Yeah.
If conditions are met, it converts into equity, which allows Eskom to better its credit metrics or debt metrics.
What does that mean, Jones? Are we talking here about a debt-free Eskom, i.e. an Eskom without an excuse for failing to maintain and create new power plants to generate power?
I think it's not to say debt-free. I think it's more to say that they can now positively reprioritize cash towards operational needs, and not use the excuse that we have to preserve cash for paying debt.
Absolutely. So the next question after that I'm going to invite you back on to come and talk about is what kind of a CEO Eskom requires. Is it a man manager? Is it a politician? Is it an economist? I don't know. You think about that, but we'll bring you back the next time. Alex, I want to come to you and apologize for not including your surname because the girls were slightly confusing me. But yes, Alex Gwala, Tax Director, Deloitte, thanks for joining us this afternoon. Alex, the minister effectively said no tax increases, but of course that doesn't mean that there are no taxes, I mean, in the main, that are being introduced in this budget. First, I want your take in terms of the actions that he has taken around the tax issue, and then also let's speak about what it means for the individual.
Okay, so maybe high level first, looking at the fact that it's for the second time in a row we're enjoying better than expected tax collections.
No, I forgot last year.
Yes.
We've forgotten about last year. You're talking about last year. We're talking about this year. So that's positive.
Yeah, the point I want to make is if you look at how the companies are currently struggling, looking at the load shedding, spending on diesel, the issue of transport to the harbour, it is an issue.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing now is going to translate to the tax collections in the FY 2024.
Right.
So the tax collections that we are realizing now, the likelihood is they will be negatively impacted because the companies from a corporate tax income, from the corporate income tax, they won't be making much profits. They won't be taxed as high.
Sure.
So we must enjoy these higher benefits while they last.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the fact that they decide to use those collections responsibly based on the budget.
Yes.
But
you're calling that responsible use?
Yes.
I'm going to come back and ask you more what you mean by that, but let's go on.
Which is critical, yes. And then you look at the incentives that they're providing now on solars. Everyone was expecting that they're going to try and do something. We were chatting earlier, Jones, that as much as it is an incentive, you still have to buy solar. So
you still need to buy it.
Yes.
It's not fully funded by this thing.
For you to get a tax incentive, you must spend money to buy it. And how many of the people that have got money to fund that?
Yeah. And the terms under which you get that money from the bank, if you go and borrow, we all know, are not the easiest.
It's costly.
Yeah.
It's costly.
And it's not everybody who qualifies to be able to do so.
Exactly. But overall, I think nothing that is really coming out here that was not expected.
Yeah.
I think what came out was really expected. The one other point that I noticed was on fuel levy. If you understood what he said fuel taxes are not increasing. But fuel taxes are made up of different components.
Yes.
There is a carbon fuel levy that is going to go up from 1st of April.
Sure.
But overall, it's not as what
issue.
we used to.
Yeah. What about the sin taxes? Any word on the sin taxes, or was this standard?
Those. One friend of mine said they must just decide and tax this thing once and say we'll come back to it after 5 years.
So that we plan our drinking patterns.
Exactly. Every year you'll expect that sin taxes will go up. So that was honestly expected. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Alex. Let's go to Professor Patrick Bond, who is unhappy and unsmiling, even though we did manage to get the bond people, who are very important in our lives, of course, a little pleased. What peeves you, Professor?
Well, my other three friends here, Johannes and Jonas and Alex, they really are speaking the language of the bond market. And apologies for my pun, but I think I would rather reject those who are so embedded in bond markets they forget the society. And the reason, I think many of us would worry that the cuts, the real after-inflation cuts in social expenditures, especially on poor people, and the child support grant or the old age grant, the 350 Rand grant. These are falling in real terms. If the inflation rate for everyone last year was 6.9%, usually it's 2 to 3% higher for the poorest. And that's because food inflation and energy inflation have been harder hitting for poor people. And as a result, we're really seeing the real cuts. And I think that should worry my dear friends here from the financial markets, because it will lead to more social unrest. Don't take my word for it. Even Thabo Mbeki a few months ago said we might face another Arab Spring threat. Now, the first time we've had Arab Spring type revolts, they've been in very sporadic ways, usually social protests over things like lack of electricity or water disconnections or some of the urban protests. We saw in 2021 a more general protest, and the result was that President Ramaphosa threw some money back. The 350 Rand, a monthly grant, went back. But it didn't go to everybody, just about 9 million instead of 12 million. I think we actually should be warning Enoch Godongwana that while he might be pleasing the financiers, this cut in real terms will hurt the rest of the society, which is 99.9% of us.
Yeah, so actually I just wanted to clarify that. So Prof, you're saying by standing still on the amounts that are being allocated for social spending, in real terms, i.e. you factor in inflation, these people are actually losing out.
That's right. And I would even go to the point where Eskom gets this massive taxpayer bailout, 254 billion. There are three ways that you save Eskom. One is you hit the current consumers, and the 18.7% rise this year is already doing that. A second way is to go to the taxpayers, which is what Godongwana has done. The third way is to do what you suggested, that is get the lenders to take a haircut. Now, why should we ask the World Bank, the US Export-Import Bank, the German KfW, the French, the British export banks to take a haircut on Eskom debt? It's because they knew that the Medupi and Kusile power plants were corrupt. That's the approach we should have engaged in, odious debt negotiation. And instead, what we've got, because Finance Minister Godongwana has bragged about it, $8.5 billion, 150 billion Rand or so, coming into Eskom and other borrowers here in hard currency finance, much of it non-concessional. And we will be using, or Eskom will be using that money to pay back the corrupt lenders. So I think that third option should have been on the table. But really, Enoch Godongwana is doing his best to please the financiers. So no haircut, even though it's needed.
I'm going to ask Jones why we didn't, or what would have happened if we got a haircut. But Prof, I just wanted to post one more question to you. In terms of what the minister has proposed here, would it have been better if he had collapsed all these grants that we have and just gone for the BIG, the basic income grant?
Yes, I mean, they're very different grants. So the elderly are now getting 2,090 Rand a month, and children closer to, I think it's 640. I'll just check that number. But the massive difference means, yes, we should have a basic income grant. That's overdue. The ANC has promised it. We have a society with about 46% unemployment, counting those who've given up looking for work. And we have the most unequal society in the world. And rich corporates are taking their money out. They're not reinvesting. We have a massive exchange control liberalization problem, which is why Finance Minister Godongwana raised the grey listing likelihood. And he's warning us that the financiers have really wrecked it for the rest of us by having these additional financial financial sanctions on us. So yes, I do think we would have been much better to have a big and to really find a way to make sure all in society have at least those basics. Don't forget it costs 50 Rand per person per day to get out of poverty. Nowhere near that.
Yeah. Alex, feel free to come in. Johann and Jones, I want you to respond to the professor on his proposal that perhaps what the minister could have done is to ask the financiers as well to take a bit of pain, i.e. the haircut that we're suggesting. I want to know what would have happened if that had been done today. Johann, I'm starting with you.
Yes, absolutely. Gee, I'm so happy that didn't happen. That would have been disaster. That would have spelled disaster for us. And what we must remember is if investors don't like something like that, and they wouldn't have liked the haircut, because that would have opened the floodgates. They wouldn't have liked that. That would have had a result impact on financial markets. The rand would have weakened. It could have led to even higher inflation. It would have led to even higher interest rates. It could have started a whole chain-linked event that could have impacted on government's sovereign bonds as well. So absolutely, the Minister and Treasury did the correct thing in that sense. And, I agree that there's risk of social unrest. I don't think that's a significant risk. All studies have shown that social grants have done a lot in terms of reducing absolute poverty. I'm not saying that enough has been done, but under the current circumstances in South Africa, until we generate more sustainable and higher growth that will eventually help the poor through unemployment reduction, etc., we cannot afford to forego this fiscal consolidation, and a haircut would have been disaster.
Can I sum up what you're saying before I ask you to answer it? I'm thinking I am hearing saying the economic cost of a haircut would have far outweighed the cost of doing so.
I think so. It would have been a default situation.
Effectively.
That's exactly
what
it
Ghana
would mean. Look at Ghana, right? And I think the point to re-emphasize is that the money used to lend to Eskom comes from our savings, our pensions, and it's not like it was unsolicited. Eskom went to them and proposed, this is what we want to do.
Yeah.
And we mustn't forget some of the investor activism that came through back in, I think it was 2015, 16, 17.
Yes.
Where lenders actually stood up saying, there are management and governance lapses here.
Yeah.
We want to exercise our right to call our money back if this doesn't change. So I think it's not passive money anymore anywhere in this world of ESG.
Yeah, it's one way of actually managing the cost of being able to support the poor.
Absolutely.
To an extent. Alex, you want to come in?
So, I'm not an expert in this area, but
this thing is around us.
My point, I noted, if you look at government generates revenue through taxes.
Yes.
And that's about 1.7 trillion. You look at the debt that is currently being projected now, it's over 500.3,
I think, trillion. Yeah.
So income, expenditure, you don't have sufficient revenue to spend.
True.
So it means you're going to borrow. So if you're going to fund the unemployed for them to remain unemployed, you're creating a bigger problem.
Yeah.
Rather, you focus on activities that are going to bring people in employment, and that way you don't need to fund them. Secondly, you start to collect taxes through personal income taxes, and they will have disposable income to spend. Then you collect VAT and all these other indirect taxes.
Yeah.
So that's how I would look at it.
Yeah.
That's how I would look at
it. So you are agreeing that the minister has handled it in the best way possible under the circumstances?
I believe so.
Yeah, okay. I don't know, Prof, if you want to respond to any of that, but I wanted to widen the discussion to the wider picture on government finances and the plans that the minister has laid out. So I wanted us to look at the budget deficit and what the minister is seeing in his medium-term outlook. But Prof, I'll give you a chance to respond very quickly.
Yes, the point about the haircut is you negotiate it, and these lenders, they finance the single most devastating act of state capture, which was Hitachi bribing the African National Congress to get the huge boiler contracts for Medupi and Kusile. And these boilers keep breaking down, and that's one reason we're at stage 6. I don't think, my dear friends, Johann, Johannes, and Alex would, if I put it like this, they would reject the idea of moral hazard. That is, the financiers of corruption should get away with it. And yet, that's the effect of it. And I think you can negotiate it. Don't forget that the outgoing World Bank president, David Malpass, himself admitted in the US Congress in 2017 that the World Bank lent in a corrupt manner for Medupi and Kusile, Medupi at least. And that, to me, is where a really serious treasury would start the process. I think the other dilemma, which is whether we have a lower budget deficit at a time of very low economic growth. In real terms, we're looking at only 0.4% growth per person in South Africa. So we're well below the sort of 6% that Gear had promised that the National Development Plan had did. And as a result, since the private sector is really on an investment strike, and since so much of our infrastructure has been run down, I would have much rather seen a higher budget deficit, which you can do in the short term. We're pretty much at the medium level of economies in terms of our overall debt to GDP ratio. So I come from this using John Maynard Keynes, who suggested during the Great Depression that when the private sector is sick, and not investing and taking the money out of the country, you need exchange controls and more state spending. I think that's entirely reasonable in this situation.
Yeah, one more little question to you on this issue of a haircut. But did you hear the arguments against going for a haircut in terms of the overall impact that it has on South African financial markets, which of course will be extended to the whole economy through various mechanisms?
Yes, if it were a complete debt default, I agree. But what I've been arguing, and many do, that there's odious debt. And those kinds of negotiations occur all the time over whether the borrowers really do owe what the lenders expect. Because the lenders, who often finance corruption or dictatorships, they really know they shouldn't. And that's why they get such high rates of return, because of that risk. I think on a one-on-one basis, I'd much rather have debt cancellation from the World Bank and the European and other major bilateral lenders than their new money. And one quick reason is because if you look at what Eskom wants to do with the new money, the $8.5 billion, they want to use 85 billion of it for methane gas. And that would be at Richards Bay and Komati. Look at their Just Energy Transition Partnership. What that will do is put us into climate sanctions. You know, financial sanctions with the gray list seems imminent, but also climate sanctions, the carbon border adjustment mechanism. What I'm saying is if you shift from coal to gas, as outgoing CEO Andre de Ruyter has wanted to do, and many others want to do, there's offshore gas in South Africa, then we bring in new pressures because we have a high carbon export, and that will lead to sanctions within about 3 years. In 2026, Europeans put on these sanctions. So I think all of these should be really rethought, and just a little tokenistic, small scale solar energy tax relief, just 15,000 Rand maximum. I think that gives us about a 60,000 Rand solar system. Now, I'd love one. I'd love to put one on tomorrow, but I don't think I could get one for 60 Rand. So I think it's going to increase energy apartheid, the division between those who can afford. And it doesn't really help those of us in the middle class who'd like to go solar. Absolutely,
absolutely. I mean, so many strands there that we could develop. But I wanted to pick up on the budget deficit question. Johann had asked you the question. He is suggesting that trying to run a lower budget deficit in an environment where you have an economy that's not growing, that's got the kind of unemployment levels that we have, is perhaps not prudent.
I understand the concerns, but I think it's absolutely prudent. What has got us in this situation in the first place is that after the global financial crisis in 2008, when the economy went into recession, the automatic stabilizers started to kick in. We were running a budget surplus in 2007, so the stabilizers kicked in. In other words, without cutting expenditure significantly, without hiking taxes, the deficit blew up because the economy went into recession. And that was healthy because we could afford to do that, having had a budget surplus before the global financial crisis started. But then after the global financial crisis, when the economy started recovering from that recession, we never cut back the excess expenditure. We never got the budget under control again. So when the next crisis hit in 2020 with the COVID crisis, we didn't have that automatic stabilizing impact. So now that we're starting on this fiscal consolidation path, we need to continue. So we've seen the results of what happened before. The ratings agencies cutting our debt into sub-investment grade. We've only now started to see some stabilization in that. If we continue on the fiscal consolidation path, we can slowly get back our ratings improvements until in a few years' time, hopefully back in investment grade. And that's crucial in a country like South Africa. We're a small, open economy. We're hugely dependent on foreign investment, what foreign investors and ratings agencies think about this economy. So we absolutely need to continue. And it's not an overnight thing. It's a steady process without hurting the economy too much. Yeah. If they wanted to, they could have hiked rates significantly, cut back expenditure significantly, and we could get to that better position over a much shorter period of time. Now we're doing it slowly. Yeah. Even though the debt to GDP ratio have improved, back in 2020, it was supposed to peak at 95% of GDP. Now, even with the Eskom debt addition, it's just above 70% of GDP. Yeah. But remember that in 2007, it was below 30%. So we've got a long way to go. And it's a steady, slow process.
Yeah. What did you make of the minister's growth numbers? Because, of course, those numbers that you're talking about are all a function of the growth number that he came up with. And what do you say of the difference in the forecast that we're getting out of the National Treasury versus the Reserve Bank? 0.3% versus 0.6%. And your own number, by the way.
Yeah, Treasury's got 0.9% for this year versus the Reserve Bank's 0.3%. I think most forecasts out there that I've seen is around 1 or above 1%. I think the Reserve Bank's number will gradually be revised upwards. And to some extent, in my personal opinion, I think the Reserve Bank used that number to warn government if they don't do anything about the electricity supply, that's what we will have. Yeah. I think Treasury's number is realistic, conservative realistic. In other words, it means that there's some upward potential there. So they based all their tax revenue forecasts off that 0.9%. I think the economy can grow somewhat better than that. The economy is not as dependent on electricity as it was in 2020. We can now produce the same GDP with 25% less electricity than in 2000. Yeah. So we're far more efficient in that sense. Lots of extra self-generation on the go, potentially lots of generation on the go within the next few months. Yeah. So I'm working on the assumption that instead of level 4, 5, 6 load shedding, we could potentially run on level 1 and 2 within a month or two for the rest of this year. So my forecast is 2% for this year. Sure. And I've got good reasons for that. Fixed investment cycle, China rebound that will help net exports, inventory cycle, etc.
Okay, 2% this year. You heard it first here. Alex, he talks about efficiency, but part of the minister's ability to present the numbers that we got today is, of course, the work that's being done by the South African Revenue Services. I want your thoughts, number one, on the outcome, and number two, on the allocation that the service got from the South Africa, from the minister, and what difference you think that will make in terms of revenue collections going forward.
Yeah. So, I mean, they started investing on resources for about 2 years, 2 years ago. Yeah. And we're now bearing fruit of that investment. And it's correct. The SARS is doing a good job in terms of collections. And, I mean, they've improved the levels of compliance overall. Yeah. But they still need to do more. Sure. So, and they need to sustain what they're doing. I mean, you'll remember they brought in Judge Dennis Davis to look at the tax gap, the difference between what we're capable of collecting and what we are currently collecting. Yes. And there are a lot of work that is being done now is to close that gap. Yeah. And it requires that they get a sophisticated tax specialist in the system. So they really deserve to be allocated more resources because you can see the output of that investment. So
absolutely.
it's doing a great job.
Yeah. So let's see. I must say I'm seeing less of those guys. You know, the guys who go on Twitter or on the social media platform posting their Porsche cars and these are the luxuries that they have.
I mean, SARS also on technology, they've improved quite a lot. So they get information easily compared to in the past. So you can see that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Long may it continue. Jones, I have a question for you and then a final question for all the panelists. My question to you is Eskom out of the woods? And the second part to that question is whether you think from here South Africa has a chance to prevent, I'm not saying increase, to prevent a further ratings downgrade.
So on the first part, that we must understand that this has just been one pillar of Eskom's problems, and that is its balance sheet and its financial stability. So they take one step further to getting out of the woods. But the operational issues are with us. The load shedding is with us for a while to come. The maintenance that needs to happen at the different units, particularly units like at Kuburg, they can't come online fast enough to take us away from these stage 7, stage 6 type of load shedding. Today we don't know where we are, isn't it? So that affects both potential growth and real growth in the current year. Sure. Because of the severity of it. And your question now of the rating agencies. I think they don't make a move on the rating levels now. I think is that a positive? That's a positive thing. I think they wait to see how some of these interventions, the execution of some of these interventions. So we will have a minister of electricity that needs to coordinate the response, and we also have essentially this monetary intervention. And we need to see the credit trends that come out of that. So give it some time. But generally, I think we are all concerned about expenditures that aren't like the wage bill that Johann mentioned. Absolutely. And those could push them towards outlook changes after MTBPS. Johann, the question is the same to you. Are we out of the woods?
In terms of Eskom, maybe I agree, the first step on the balance sheet, but we've got a long way to go on the maintenance side. In terms of the ratings agencies, I absolutely believe that we've seen the bottom in the rating cycle. Fiscal consolidation and the path that we're on will see further improvements, but I agree. I think Moody's and Fitch will likely wait until after the MTBPS to see how the wage negotiations go, to see how these things unfold in terms of electricity over the rest of the year. But I do think they will then join S&P with upgrading their stable outlook statement to positive as well. So by the end of the year, we could sit with all three ratings agencies with a positive outlook statement.
Alex, what's the risk that this standstill on taxes could be something that comes to bite us in a year or two when the economy starts growing again? I mean,
it's possible. I mean, there's always a risk, but something has to give. I think it's important that we use taxes to start reactivate our economy. I think that's what they've done here. I mean, if they push up taxes, it will have been a challenge. I mean, even the diesel rebate that they're providing to the manufacturing sector, it is helping because those diesel costs, the input cost that ends up with me and you when we consume goods, it's now not going to be pushed down to us. So it's helping us in terms of our disposable income. But from an overall revenue collections, yes, there is going to be a dent. And like I said earlier, with what is happening in the economy, we're going to see less tax revenues being collected going forward.
Absolutely. You and I could have also used a rebate. Prof, I'm coming to you last to give us an important perspective in terms of how far you think we may be from another July 2021 type scenario.
Well, the other danger, yes, we can never predict such incidents and whether it was caused by then late President Zuma's, the former President Zuma's jailing, and whether that occurs again, I don't know. I think the main thing, though, is that we're seeing other disasters where the state is desperately needed and missing in action. And it's just here in Gauteng and in Mpumalanga and other parts of the country with the massive rains that did such damage to infrastructure. Last April and May, there were 2 rain bombs that devastated Durban's infrastructure and even Transnet's. Then we've had Ngobeka on a day zero situation. It looks even worse the next few days as they try to make their water cuts. These are the kinds of, let's say, needed climate adaptation, resilience, and climate proofing infrastructure, and also the loss and damage payments. And Finance Minister Godongwana makes a few, vague remarks, but unless we get those right, then the kinds of disasters that leave people so completely forlorn, and 500 dead in one 2-day period in Durban last year, will continue, and our state will just be seen with less and less legitimacy. And I really don't think we can afford that with the climate catastrophe getting worse every year, can we?
Absolutely. You're an academic, so I was going to ask you to mark him. What does he get out of 10?
Oh. At one point, I even taught Enoch Godongwana Das Kapital, 1997, in Port Alfred when he was a trade unionist. So I would mark myself first, 0. I would get an F for having persuaded him to take a left-wing cause. He's really moved to the right and deserves, as a result, a social failure.
Social failure. Professor Patrick Bond, Professor of Sociology at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you. Johann Els, Chief Economist, Old Mutual. Thank you, sir. John Gondo, Senior Research Analyst at Nedbank CIB. Thank you. Alex Gwala, Director, Tax at Deloitte. Thank you, sir, for coming through and chatting to us. There you have it. You have your own views, and we'll continue talking about it, of course. But thank you for joining us for now.